Right, let me erase, don't need to erase some of these things. Just, okay, so yeah, there was an earlier version that got deleted, it was a bit too soft. So again, this is what we have. We are doing another source-based chapter. This is on outbreak of the Cold War. I have a map here on the on this side. Okay, the graphic organizer in the middle, right? As well as another map at the bottom, and then you have a timeline, right? So these are the three things that normally I find useful when I'm trying to make sense of a particular event. And of course, the graphic organizer should correspond to your textbook, right? So as labeled here, 1, 2, and 3, this actually marks the three main reasons, I would say the broad reasons as to what led to the outbreak of the Cold War. And 4, 5, 6 would be, in the previous iteration, it was called the manifestations, or simply the early consequences of the Cold War, because Cold War really stretched for a very long time. We understand that, okay, the one exception we have is the Truman Doctrine, where it, to me, I use it as the trigger that formally marks, or the trigger event, no, as the event that formally marks the outbreak of the Cold War, all right, in official terms, right? So yeah, 1, 2, 3, we're going to look at first, and to see how these things played a role in contributing to the breakdown of relations and ultimately to the early onset of the Cold War. All right, so we'll start with by looking at factor one, right? Impact of World War II on Europe. So this is not a World War II topic, but you will need knowledge of World War II to better make sense of this. And first off, the first bit on Europe in ruins. All right, yeah, Europe experienced a devastating war. I'm just going to draw attention, or take you to France, UK, and Germany. These were, prior to this, the countries that played a very big role in determining global affairs at that point of time, because they have extensive colonies as well. And America was isolationist. So really, Germany, France, UK, they were playing a leading role in dictating global affairs up until World War II. Right, World War II, the extensive devastation these three countries faced, namely, because of the bombings, the fighting that took place in France, in Germany, most of their London especially heavily bombed. So Europe in ruins. Therefore, this arrow saying that how it's connected, it led to the decline of Western European powers, creating a vacuum that was definitely being eyed by America and Soviet Union. Okay, America, of course, wanting to impose their ideology, Soviet Union wanting to do the same. Soviet Union has a big advantage in that they were in Europe itself. Okay, Soviet Union is here, right? America is in a different continent. And traditionally, America tended to stay away from European affairs, all right? So this was the new political landscape, whereby you have Western European powers unable to play a very important, decisive role. And you, of course, had America and Soviet Union at the end of the war wanting to flex their military, industrial muscle in this part of the world, right? So just a quick glance at the timeline. So here is what we have. Just so you know that the war lasted from, just after Nazi-Soviet Pact here, all right, all the way up until the defeat of Germany. This marks the end of the European War, dropping of the atomic bomb. Surrender of Japan came shortly after in 1945. Okay, we move on to the next factor. Factor number 2, early tensions between America and Soviet Union. So the first bit here is about their competing ideologies. So if I wanted to acknowledge the earliest, the first few occasions in which communism, the ideology of the Soviet Union, first locked horns with America, whose ideology of I would say democracy, capitalism. It was to be right from 1917, but my timeline doesn't go all the way back there. But just to type here, democracy, and capitalism versus communism, okay, and authoritarian rule. Very important concepts to be aware of. Okay, very important concepts to be aware of, so that you can make sense of the remainder of the chapter. Okay, this will not be the video where I take you through these concepts, but simple ideas, democracy, we should be familiar with this, being given the right to vote, to elect your leaders. Capitalism, right, where you allow market forces to decide how and what should be produced by a country, as opposed to communism, okay, the equal sharing of resources, coupled with authoritarianism, where you have a one-party state, and the one-party state also will look into every single aspect of ruling the country, so the political, social, economic aspect. So competing ideologies alone, to me, doesn't necessarily explain the Cold War, but this was the long-term cause in pitting these two countries against one another, especially when there's no glue, which brings us to, okay, the factors next to it: a history of mistrust before 1939 and a marriage of convenience. So these two things, I'm gonna take us to the timeline. History of mistrust, sure, way before 1939 there was already a history of mistrust, but the Soviet decision to sign the Nazi-Soviet Pact in August 1939 really reflected the difference in the ideology of the Americans and the Soviet Union, right, whereby really the Soviet Union chose to ally themselves with the Germans, and then simply appearing as though they were forming this alliance against democratic countries, right? Or at least that could be how America would have looked at it. Okay, so this could be used as an example to illustrate the history of mistrust that the two countries share. Okay, of course, the marriage of convenience popped up sometime in July 1941 when Germany decided to backtrack on their Nazi-Soviet Pact, the non-aggression pact, by attacking the largest land invasion to this date, the German invasion of Soviet Union. Okay, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So in that logic, Soviet Union and America found common ground. So that's the marriage of convenience that we saw just now earlier. The two countries recognized that they had a common enemy in Germany, and America, not yet officially in the war. They're going to be in the war. They don't know yet, but in a month's time, they will be officially in the war. They extend the Land-Lease Act to Soviet Union, which means that they're going to start sending supplies. This would be in the form of food, railway tracks, and munitions and weapons. So that marks this bit here about the marriage of convenience, right? The marriage of convenience, right, was, seen by many. An example of it would be the Land-Lease Act. So the war doesn't really go. I mean, the alliance didn't really go very smoothly. There were, of course, a lot of points in which they found the partnership to be very, very useful. Okay, but the fact that they had very little in common with one another, all right, and for example, one of the key things that they disagreed on would be the amount of time America took to actually open the Western Front, open the second front, and this finally happened, D-Day, Operation Overlord, when America landed somewhere in France. Okay, I'm just going to estimate somewhere here, to reopen a front so that it would distract the Germans, right? So Soviet Union has been calling for this front for a long time. Soviet Union, okay, were dealing with the threat of Germany for a long time, right? So they wanted America to open a front somewhere here, right? So that the Germans would have to pull back some of their troops to deal with the Americans, the British, and this would allow Soviet Union to recover, and to push them back. The fact that America took very long to open this second front definitely added to their sense of suspicion. Okay, so that marks the end of factor. So we're done with 1, we're done with 2. Let's look at 3. Wartime alliance breaks down. So it's branched out into 3. You have the Yalta Conference, right? Then Potsdam, and then worsening relations. All right. So yeah, important conferences here. The Yalta Conference, right? If you see sources about the Yalta Conference happening here, okay, it comes before the defeat of Germany. It comes before the dropping of the atomic bomb. So it represented a time where they found more common ground, right? Because the enemy was still there, but the writing was on the wall. They knew they were going to win, so they were making plans, right? What to do with the rest of the Europe, namely at the end of the war. Okay, they had to make decisions about Germany. Right, they had to make decisions about Germany. They had to make decisions about Poland. All right, yeah, these were countries that played a very important role in the outbreak of the war in the first place. So, yeah, these countries here, Germany and Poland, I think broadly speaking, do I need to show you what they look like on the map? Just one time, I guess, and where they are. So Germany here in this map is, of course, already divided, but at that point of time, right, was one entity, and Poland next to it. Poland was the scene in which the outbreak of war took place. So at the Yalta Conference, at least, they had more common ground, right? Both countries needed each other's partnership. UK needed the Soviet support for their interest in Greece. So in exchange, Britain was quite okay with whatever Stalin wanted. He wanted more influence in Eastern Europe. Yeah, UK was more agreeable to it. Okay, but the plans they made, right? They agreed that Germany were to be divided into 4, with 4 zones of occupation. They agreed that Poland, their Soviet Union, should retain an influence there, but there will be elections, or there will be some form of elections in Poland, right? So yeah, normally I just tell students because you can't write too much in a single paragraph. So Yalta Conference, okay, the discussions were about Germany and Poland. That should be enough to illustrate that, okay, they found more common ground, but by the time they went for Potsdam Conference, the personnel had changed. Sadly, Roosevelt had died prior to this, and Truman was propelled into the position of President of America. Churchill, sometime during the conference, did not win the elections and was replaced by Clement Attlee. So, change in personnel, the fact that Germany was already defeated, meant that the relations were a lot more tense. Right, Roosevelt and Stalin enjoyed a longer relationship. All right, there was a lot more respect for one another. Truman did not share the same relationship with Stalin. Stalin does not know much. It said that Stalin asked his spies to look into the affairs of Truman, and then they found nothing much because they were so unprepared, in trying to spy on him, to find dirt on him, and things like that. So at the Potsdam Conference, same issues of Germany and Poland, but by now there's a lot more friction, there's a lot more tension, and they found very little to agree on. Okay, most importantly, and this would be where the stage for the parting of ways starts to take place. And of course, by then in July, America had successfully tested the atomic bomb. So of course, Truman had that confidence that the Americans can stand up to Soviet bullying, for that matter. All right. So yeah, so the Potsdam Conference, a lot of things happened. And already, if you talk about Germany and Poland, again, we use the same example. The disagreements are a lot more, telling. USA wanted a German recovery, but USSR wanted heavy reparations. All right, you can't. It's not mutually. They are mutually exclusive. You can't have both. So there were going to be problems here already. right? America wanted recovery because if you are occupying a country, you are responsible over the country. There are rules in place. So they don't want to drag the recovery. They've also learned their lesson from extracting a heavy, a heavy treaty on Germany may not really be the way to go. Soviet Union, of course, wanted reparations for the extensive damage that Soviet Union experienced. So they wanted that. They don't care about German recovery. So you can't have both. So already there'll be disagreements, and later this will play out in things like the Berlin Blockade. In Poland, by then, okay, Soviet Union already made things very hard for the Polish government in exile who returned. The Soviet Union already gave their support to the communists in Poland, who they had influence over. Any semblance of an elections would definitely be one that does not meet the expectations of the Americans, okay, because the Soviet had already arrested any politicians who could have appeared in elections, but if they didn't want them to win elections, they just took their names off the list. So you don't have a full-fledged election. So by then, news filtering about what was happening in Poland definitely was a dampener at the Potsdam conference. So yeah, if you want to talk about examples of the breakdown relations, you can use Germany and Poland to illustrate that. Okay, the dropping of the atomic bomb also did not make things better. Right, definitely the Soviet Union viewed that with suspicion as well. Okay, so we look back at the okay, that wasn't intended. We look back at the graphic organizer because that's what you're going to be looking at when you're revising. Yep, so we spoke about the major disagreements. Okay, we spoke about the Yalta Conference already. We spoke about Potsdam, the changes of leadership, increasing Soviet control in places like Poland, disagreements over Germany and the Manhattan Project, all causing more and more friction. Okay, then when we talk about this point here, worsening relations about Potsdam Conference, okay, the use of the atomic bomb subsequently after. So these are things that happen after. Okay, we're going to see later in the timeline Churchill's Iron Curtain speech and the salami tactics that was taking place all over the Eastern Europe. So Eastern Europe here on the map. So I want students to have a very clear idea of what Eastern Europe is. Erase a bit. So Soviet Union's border extends until here, right? So Eastern Europe, they are referring to these areas here where Soviet Union is going to extend their influence. Okay, and this was done through this thing called salami tactics, right? Slicing away of the independence of this country. So it didn't happen in one fell swoop. Okay, possibly round one, they would arrest leaders in these countries, nationalist leaders, people who have fought against the Germans, people who could have collaborated with the Red Army, but they didn't fit into the communist vision that Soviet Union had for these territories, so they were arrested, so they can't participate in elections. So when elections did take place in some of these places, there will be heavy Soviet interference until they see an outcome that they favor. So from 1945 onwards to 1947, 48 in some places, you see these countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, East Germany being led by very authoritarian communist leaders who give their support to Soviet Union or who paid, who recognized Soviet's influence in their own territory. So while that was happening, that was the scene in which America responded by inviting Churchill, who came to America to give a speech, and he talks about the fall of the Iron Curtain, all right, saying that, Europe has now been divided, right, between these two very different political ideologies, right? So maybe the speech could be, in a way, marks the beginning of the Cold War. Okay, so just look at this for a bit. March 1946, the Churchill makes the Iron Curtain speech in response to the salami tactics, which has been ongoing. The salami tactics has been going on and on throughout 45 to 48. Okay, so after the Iron Curtain speech, that was what Truman needed, right, to spell out the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine, otherwise known as the beginning of the containment policy, where America committed to right providing support to Greece and Turkey, okay, who were closest to the Soviet Union, in danger of seeing communism spread. So military aid, financial aid, to stop the spread of communism there. Okay, so that was the Truman Doctrine. The policy of containment went beyond just these two countries. Any other countries that also were dealing with problems of communist insurrection or communists trying to take over the country, America would then give their support. Right. So around the same time, right, then you also had the Marshall Plan a year later, which was a financial plan to basically offer money to Europe. So it was even offered to Soviet Union, but of course Soviet Union rejected it. So the Marshall Plan was a money plan. Countries took money, right, to rebuild their countries. Remember, Europe was in ruins, so rebuild their country at the end of World War II. The idea being, if these countries are prospering, okay, they will be less likely to be attracted to communism, right? So like kind of like nipping the problem in the bud, BUD. Okay, so yeah, countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia were all offered, but Soviet Union said that this was a means in which, so you will see sources where they will show that the Soviet Union interpreted the Marshall Plan as a way for America to make their way into these countries, making inroads into these countries, or in which they can subsequently take advantage, right? So that was the Marshall Plan. So I spoke about the Truman Doctrine, the Marshall Plan. Okay, Soviet Union's response to Truman Doctrine and Marshall Plan would be the Cominform and the Comecon, right? So these two things seen on the right in October 1947 and 1949. Very briefly, the Cominform was a way in which Soviet Union tried to expand communist influence. So countries, political parties all around the world that were communists could could draw support from the Cominform in terms of giving them material, in terms of giving them advice, in some cases money to start the party, right? The idea was to coordinate and spread communism all over the world. Comecon is more in response to the Marshall Plan, to coordinate the economies of the satellite states, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, to find situations in which they could provide subsidies to one another, provide loans to one another, in order to facilitate their recovery from World War II. Okay, so that's Comecon, Comiform, right? Okay, the next big thing that we're going to look at, because we're done with that, would be the Berlin Blockade. So Berlin Blockade, very important to understand the geography of it. Okay, I like this map, but yeah, there are other maps out there as well. This actually marks the outline. This whole thing is Germany. So Germany at the end of World War II was occupied by these four zones, right? You have UK, France, US, and the Soviet Union. All right, so each of them are occupying these parts of Germany, and essentially by 1948, the fractures were quite clear. The Soviet was starting to rule quite differently, and the Western European occupiers, or the Western occupiers like America, France, Britain, were coordinating a lot better. Okay, and things were disagreements were starting to take place. All right, they already started to make plans without including the Soviet representative. All right, because they felt that Soviet Union kept on sabotaging whatever plans they had for a German recovery. So the straw that broke the camel's back, okay, or the last straw for Soviet Union, or for was when the three of them introduced a new currency for their zone, right? And the thing is this: the French, American, and British, they have zones in Berlin as well. This is Berlin, right? Berlin is the capital of Germany. It is industrial, economic, financial heart of Germany. So you have a British, French, American zone there. And in those zones, they started to use the new currency. So to Stalin, all right, they already didn't like the arrangement of having a Western Berlin, all right, in their Soviet sphere. It's like your neighbor owning property in your own house. It's not elegant. It's just a very uneasy arrangement. So Stalin took to introducing a blockade around Berlin, right? And this happened in June 1948. Okay, of course, America, Britain introduced the Berlin Airlift to fly over Berlin, fly over the Soviet sphere, and distribute the resources that was needed for 11 months. And it was an extraordinary achievement, to the point that Stalin actually conceded, and then he stood down and allowed for the roads, canals, trains to continue providing aid to West Berlin. The unique thing about this whole event was that the Soviet troops could actually shoot down the British and American planes flying in, but they chose not to do so. America could have used force as well, but they chose not to do so as well. In a way, they were writing, it was as though they were writing up plans as to what could not be done in the event of a Cold War, right? You could try to hurt one another as much as possible, but stop shy of actually fighting the war. Okay, one of the key consequences of the Berlin blockade was the creation of NATO and the creation of East Germany. Basically, this whole entity became East Germany, and it really mirrored what was happening in that part of the Iron Curtain. NATO became a military alliance, kind of like a tripwire situation, where if any member of NATO was attacked, it would mean an attack on all members of NATO. Therefore, it added this military dimension to the division of what was going on in Europe. And of course, Soviet Union responded by introducing the Warsaw Pact, a similar military arrangement allowing the Soviet Union to place troops in any satellite states, to coordinate their military, to coordinate military exercises. Similarly, for the Americans as well, the NATO allowed America to introduce nuclear missiles into UK, into France, into Italy, right? And this really represented the manifestations of the Cold War. You see the arms race expanding, really just looking at the timeline, just in time. The beginning of the Cold War, or what the Cold War actually is, all right, I recognize it as a state of affairs in which America and Soviet Union are in competition to spread their respective ideologies. And naturally, because there's finite space, they would run into conflicts in different parts of the world. Okay, they want to hurt each other as far as possible, but stop shy of fighting a real war, turning it to a hot war, thereby always being stuck in that particular arrangement that they had. So this eventually gave birth to things like proxy wars, the arms race, competing in different spheres, such as even sports, the arts. So that was what the Cold War was like. I'm going to end here. Hope you found this useful.